I was very aware that something radically different was going on because I was stripped of both of those guys overnight. He was fired, and Robert Milley was transferred to a white storyline. He was very angry about that and left the show. And immediately, because he was so gifted and he was coming out of such a hot storyline, it was picked up immediately on another show. Gorgeous guy, wonderful actor, fabulous person. And all of a sudden, both of those guys were gone, and I was being paired with an older black character actor in a platonic relationship who was playing a congressman who spent most of his time in Washington, D.C. And that's how the show limped along for the next 2 years. You look like you remember that. You must have been a kid. How could you? Anyway, I didn't know what was happening. I thought that I made excuses for her, and I said to myself, oh, well, she's got a whole new soap she has to do with a whole bunch of other characters. She's putting you on a back burner. Well, the soap magazines were furious. I said, what's going on? She's going to, just like Doris Day is going to be the oldest virgin in television, she's in movies, she's going to be the oldest virgin in television. Let's give this poor child a story. And eventually they realized they had to do something. So this is 1972, 4 years later. They brought in Al Freeman, and 40 years later, I would find out, paid him 4 times what they had paid me. Put him out front as the black star of the show, changed Lillian and me into satellites revolving around him as his wife and his mother-in-law. And there was absolutely no chemistry whatsoever, in the sense that he was always out detecting in various white storylines, while Lillian and I were moved back to the kitchen table to sit around and gossip about the neighbors and keep them caught up with what was going on with the white storylines. I mean, we were really turned into completely utilitarian characters. And I never saw her to talk to ever again. I think I nodded to her once across a fan gathering at a hotel ballroom, but we never interfaced again for several years. Meanwhile, I was turned over to surrogates that made it very clear to me that don't get any fancy ideas about yourself. Don't think you're first in line, you're last. And that suddenly got to be very, very obvious for a lot of reasons, including the way this occurred. This is about 6 years into the show, maybe 8. Daytime library series, One Life to Live. They did a wonderful thing, Daytime. They made a library series. This is number 6, where they gave each show an entire issue. Mm-hmm. The producer of our show at the time was the magazine allowed her to place everyone. There are only 2 original stars from the founding families left. This is 8 years in the show. Doris Bellack, who is brilliant, who played Anna Wolick, later Anna Wolick Craig. There she is. One other original star. That's me, in the back, in a line of men. There were guys on crew, God bless them, that were furious. I got along great with everybody, just the management was always the problem. I adored the crew, and they were very fond of me. One guy, handsome, looked like Sean Connery on a good day. Sean Connery on a good day. He was gorgeous. He was greater looking than anybody they had in front of the camera. He was angry. He said, honey, they could shove you to the back of the bus, but you're the only one in the whole bunch who looks like a movie star. I never forgot him for that, because you go through so much, you're never quite sure whether something's been done or whether you have a chip on your shoulder or somebody just didn't think too much. But there are all sorts of people in front of me who are absolutely new to the show, and 1 or 2 are new to the industry. That's posed so that no white woman has to look at my back. That's what it's about. And the guys on the crew knew it. And this picture is even more racist than it seems, because I was very aware that Lillian was nowhere in sight. And I wondered if she had been sick. So I called her on the phone later, and I found out they had never let her know that the photo was taking place. So she, Lillian Heyman, my mother, was effectively edited completely out of the picture. Anyway, that's the way they sort of played the game. There was a point in time where Al became very... he felt we were boring everybody to death. So he said, it's time for one of us to have an affair. Well, Al doesn't write, but I did, and I listened to what he said. And they, by the way, they used my writing from time to time, but only on the proviso that I write for free. They didn't want to pay for it. I did not mind that, and to this day I don't, because there are some things to me that are more important than money. I regarded that as a Faustian bargain, however, one that was acceptable to me because the opportunity to write and get black characters on that screen that were watched by millions of people that were more complicated and nuanced and non-stereotypical, I considered better than gold, so I was willing to do it. So because of what Al had said, I wrote the whole Jack Scott storyline. Remember the whole Jack Scott storyline? That's my storyline. I have a 30-page proposal. I wrote out a 30-page proposal. It had to go all the way up to Fred Silverman, who was the CEO at the time, for his imprimatur before it could be put into whatever. The problem was, when it got through that process and came down the line to be got his imprimatur, was about to be put into, there had been a change in the producer at the head of the studio. And because I had supported the previous producer when they were trying to kick her out, he called me up to the office my first day on the show and said, "You're the only person in this entire cast who has not congratulated me on becoming the producer." And he made it clear. He made it clear that he regarded me as an enemy. And I said, "I guess you were referring to the letter. Yes, I wrote the letter. It had nothing to do with you." I said I was only being loyal to somebody I thought was very good in the first place, and had also given me the job. So he made it clear that nevertheless we were enemies. And every single thing that happened in relation to that storyline, I was made to pay. First of all, they cast the one person that I begged them not to cast. He called me up to the office and he told me, "I'm about to cast this gentleman," and he mentioned his name. "I'm about to cast him in the role of Jack Scott." I said, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't, please." I said, "I can tell immediately that we're like oil and water. It's not going to work. It just isn't. No fault of his, no fault of mine, but it is going to be deadly. Please don't do this. I can tell from the audition what it's going to be." He said, well, that's too bad. I'm going to do it. And I had been so good, because I know men don't like tears. They feel like it's dirty pool. Not these days, of course. I mean, everybody's crying, including all our politicians. But back then, the guys didn't do it, just the girls. Okay. So I really started crying. I said, "Please don't do this." I said, "I not only am the actress that has to play opposite this guy, I'm the writer who created the character. Don't do this to me, please." He said, "Well, there are times when we know better, and that's the way it's going to be, so get yourself together and, get with the program." Well, he hired him, and the guy, from the moment he appeared on camera, I started getting phone calls from the black theater community. One girl told Lillian, an actress by the name of P.D. Trigg, said, "He's going to lose her the job." And I thought that was pretty much hyperbole. But when they have relationships, they don't have people meet right away. They introduce the guy, and he works for about 3 or 4 weeks before he meets who's the girl that's supposed to be the love of his life or whatever, or so on. For 3 or 4 weeks, I was told by the cast that he was flubbing all over the place, that he didn't learn his lines, that they were having to do takes and what have you. And the producer was sitting up there in the control room, and he knew that what was going on had nothing to do with me. But once I started working with him, he blamed me. He called me up to the office. He said, he shook a finger in my face. He said, "You're intimidating him, you're sabotaging him, you're trying to make your predictions come true. Cut that out, do you understand?" And I had to go through 2 years of that on a 3-year contract. My back became so frozen because every day that I went into work, I had to pray that somebody else's work didn't open me up to attack. It's terrifying to know that you cannot control your situation because it doesn't depend on what you do. It depends on what somebody else does. I put up with everything that I could possibly put up with in the situation. But when it got close to the end of the 3-year contract, I realized that I was going to have to make a decision as to whether it's one thing to do what you have to do when you're contracted to a show. It's another thing to sign up for more of same. I got together all of my wherewithal. I went over his head and made an appointment with Josie Emmerich as the senior vice president in charge of daytime television, and I laid out the whole thing for her from start to finish. I said, "Look, I need the job desperately. This is the only job I've ever had on a camera that lasted more than a week. I have to be able to sign." But I said, unless you can change this what's going on, I cannot sign for the sake of my own health. And she clucked like she was concerned and whatever and so on, but nothing changed. And so when it came time to sign, I said, "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot resign." And so she took me out to lunch, and she said that she said, "Oh, well, with somebody as talented as you are, obviously you want to move on." I said, "Josie, be real.